the context of an emerging artist night, you can definitely see, how that would end up making a lot of people unhappy. And particularly, I reckon I'd feel a bit violated if I went to a gig expecting to see emerging artists and was instead presented with an AI band. You'd probably be pretty filthy because that wasn't like the pretense under which you purchased your ticket.
There were a bunch of creatives in Canberra last week. Obviously, Holly Rankin or Jack River has been very vocal on it. There was also KLP, William Barton, Paul Dempsey, just an absolute range of creations, authors. We also had John Collins from Powderfinger. There were film composers down there too. So it's not just music that's being affected, it's just art and creatives in general who are opposing a lot of what AI are trying to really steal from these artists.
Gentlemen, this is Democracy Manifest.
Well, we're here, and we're 24 hours after the Socceroos have been eliminated from the World Cup. So if you could please just be gentle on us for the next 4 years, because it's the way losing on penalties. If you haven't been following it, lost on penalties to Egypt, and it's just the worst way to get knocked out of a tournament. And then when you compound some of the tactical decisions that occurred throughout the match as well, it really stings, because for once it felt a knockout game was winnable as opposed to just dreaming and hoping for the best.
Yeah, it's exactly right. Welcome to Homebrewed. This is still a music podcast. We have some great stories about, well, I wouldn't say great, some interesting stories about AI coming your way a little bit later, but please indulge us, Cam and I, big football fans, and we're still hurting, man. We got up so early. It is the worst way to lose. On reflection, not a way I think you or I, Cam, have experienced losing. Maybe Chelsea for you, but through the Mariners, through Socceroos, I haven't experienced a penalty shootout loss for a while. And it was the worst way to lose, particularly, as you said, because it actually felt like with a couple of different circumstances we could have won that game. Obviously the penalties, but also just in regular time. And then you're just sitting there with the reality on the couch at 7 a.m. after being up since 3:50 that it's over and you've got to wait 4 years.
I've got to be honest, it's a really shit way to start your weekend.
Yeah.
As you said, Saturday morning, 7 a.m. You're going, a shell of a human being right now. I'm just feeling a lot of emotions, but also very numb at the same time. It was, anyone who was been following the Socceroos on their World Cup journey, I'm sure you're having similar feelings as well. I sort of likened the penalty shootout. I said to you, I was like, this is giving me Matildas versus France flashbacks to when that penalty shootout in Brisbane, that epic penalty. I can't remember how many. There was 20 odd penalties. I think
penalties was taken.
It was insane. We didn't actually get that far because we bloody missed 2 of them. we only kicked 4.
It was over quickly.
Yeah, it was over very quickly, which might have been a bit of a blessing in terms of heartbreak, but it still hurts. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. As Eamonn said, we've got a couple of really interesting stories all under the AI umbrella.
I would say if you're feeling negative about the Socceroos yesterday, as we still are, we're carrying that through. We're not going to help you. Well, sorry, not yesterday, whenever you're listening to this. But yeah, we're not going to help you. But, hopefully you learn some stuff and you're interested and we offer some insightful debate, at least, which, can be had for the Socceroos, but we'll leave that to other podcasts.
Yeah, and for us to discuss once we stop recording, because we know not everyone enjoys sport who listens to this podcast, which is fair enough. But we're going to start. I saw this story throughout the week over on Instagram, and I thought, wow, this is an interesting development because of the company who were involved. We're talking about Good Intent. They're copying some backlash for adding an AI artist to their mixed bag events, which is at Bootleggers in Newtown. Good Intent with the booking agency on that event happens every week on a Wednesday. And yeah, there was an AI artist added to that bill, which caught a lot of people by surprise. No one was aware that they were an AI artist from all reports. A lot of the fellow artists who were on the bill only found out that they were AI during rehearsals, I think, or during the actual performances as well. And they were left scratching their heads and I would say rightly and understandably quite annoyed at that situation as well.
Yeah, I would say this is one of the first examples we've really seen within, I guess, our immediate, not like immediate, but like within proximity to us in this way. if I'm not mistaken. Like something like this happened in Sydney. It was pretty unique. You kind of heard about these things popping off in various places, but yeah, it's basically Good Intent, who we had Rick Bridgman on our show last year to chat about the Greater Good Initiative, which is a fantastic annual competition they do for artists in Sydney. But they've organised the artists for this particular show, and one of the early artists turned out to be basically using presenting as a 3-piece band. 2 of those members, however, were AI avatars.
Yeah, that was how the artist described the group, is that they were avatars or robots, was how they described them. And effectively, the vocals were live and it was an actual human being for the main vocals, but everything else was AI generated, including backing vocals, including obviously the actual music itself. I actually didn't run this by you, Eamon, but I'm sure you'd be in agreement with me. We don't wish to name the AI artists here just to not give them any further attention. But if you are interested, you can find it because there are plenty of articles about this incident online. But we would just like to not shine any spotlight on the artist itself, because whilst we're a little bit conflicted, I suppose, with some of our feelings, we've discussed it a lot. Is it a tool? Is it just blatant ripping off and theft? And, there's certainly a lot of middle ground as well. But I think as a general, anything that is quite, certainly in this case, a lot of it is AI generated. We'd like to not promote that too much.
Yeah. So Cam and I were talking about this obviously before we started recording, and there's an interesting debate you can have around this, because this particular artist was booked on the bill. They were up early in the night. It was still a human that was up there. There was still a human kind of singing into the mic and performing and putting on a show for those that were there. But as you mentioned, there's kind of backing vocals, instrumentation, production that's happening as part of that performance that is completely AI generated via the use of Suno as well, which we've spoken about in this podcast before, and doesn't have a great kind of I suppose, ethical standing when it comes to use of work. They were sued by the labels, big labels last year, and then I think entered into an agreement with them thereafter.
Warner, I think it was. Warner and Suno had an agreement where if you're signed to Warner Music, you can, I hope it was an opt-in. My memory is it was opt-in. I hope that's what it was. But you can basically opt in for Suno to use your music, and then you get some sort of royalty payments for it being able to use your music and whatnot, which is, again, conflicting feelings, because at least you're getting some sort of payment, but there's really no protection over what they're doing with your music if you give it permission. But anyway, yeah, this artist was using Suno to generate the drums and all. I actually don't know what it was. They've been described as an Afro-pop group. But all of the music that you heard, apart from the live vocals, were AI generated.
Yes. So my initial reaction I had was like, well, I understand why this would blindside punters and other artists, and you probably need to really be telling people this is what you are. However, had it been a solo artist booked, you've still got one human up there who's performing to the to the crowd, versus one human for the AI band. What is there as much damage here as kind of is being suggested? But then, as we were talking about it further, it was like, well, the Suno platform that's used, or the AI that's used to create the other 2 avatars, is undoubtedly ripping off the work of other people to create that music in the first place. And even still, there's the prevention of local artists, human beings, getting up and taking that stage instead. Of course, the one human member of that band is a local creator, but it's kind of supplementing the band with AI that is using work that has no doubt not been paid for, and also there wasn't disclaimers and other bands didn't know and things like that. So I can understand the backlash in hindsight, but I suppose it presented a pretty interesting debate as to like kind of where are we, if we could ever reach a collective perspective, where are we drawing the line between what's okay, because AI is used in music all the time and will continue to be, and at which point does it become not okay?
Yeah, and to cement what you were talking about just then as well, it's robbing another, because how often do we see it where, you need someone to play bass guitar in your band, so you find another local musician to play bass for you. Like even locally, if you're a solo singer but you're playing on stage, you tend to have fellow session musicians or other people in bands to fill in and play alongside you. Those opportunities are being robbed by the use of AI here. It's not, I think people even, Owen Butterworth, Tom Josephs, they fill in quite a lot for musicians. Lockie is another one who was sessioning on bass for Alaskia quite a lot as well. Like those opportunities would be gone if Alaskia is like, hey, I'm going to use AI instead of getting actual musicians in behind me. Which is, I think, and part of what Mixed Bag, it's a night for emerging artists, right? That's what they're trying to promote. So perhaps in that context, the use of AI is even more of an offense because you're robbing, as I said, an emerging artist that chance. But then if you scale up and you're a massive national act, I'm also then trying to connect this to some of the hologram stuff that we see, either when people pass. Yeah, exactly. Like how much of that is also, I don't know, they're a real artist, I suppose, but they're not really there, to cover in a lot of that grey area. But say Eminem is on stage and uses AI, it's like, well, you can clearly afford to pay actual musicians to do that instead. So I don't really know if there's anywhere along the spectrum from emerging to massive where it's sort of acceptable not to have session musicians performing on stage.
Yeah, I think so. And I suppose fundamentally you're basically like it's A versus B. A is human beings who are creative and are creating that themselves versus B, something that has been generated, by an algorithm or a computer that's using human creatives as its source material.
And that's the second part of the issue.
So in that context, like, mate, if you want to have an AI gig or an AI concert, with a range of artists, blah, 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 and you advertise that way, eat your heart out. But in the context of an emerging artist night, you can definitely see, how that would end up making a lot of people unhappy. And particularly, I reckon I'd feel a bit violated if I went to a gig expecting to see emerging artists and was instead presented with an AI band. You'd probably be pretty filthy because that wasn't like the pretense under which you purchased your ticket. So I can understand, yeah, definitely. It was like it's definitely promoted some interesting debates and conversations, I think, like in my own head and in our own heads about like kind of where we draw the line. And it's stories like this that do help us kind of work out what we think about these things, because you have to see these things in practice to then form an opinion, to understand why you feel a certain way and whether that's justified. But I think with this, yeah, I think it's understandably pissed a lot of people off. Good intent for their part.
Sorry, just before you do, to expand on that, how we've often had the debate about AI music. Well, the live scene will be protected because you physically need to be up on stage. You can't have AI musicians on stage. Like, that's not going to work. That's not going to be a thing. Recorded music, we understand, we know where it's at the moment. But live music, that's something completely different. And now we've been faced with a live AI group, effectively. As Judge said, it's really stirred the pot and caused even more thinking and debate discussions around it. Definitely.
And it's not like it's, gorillas where, yes, they're all virtual members, but Damon Albarn created all of them. And, it's still a product of his creation. It's just how that creation is presented. It's like these members are just AI generated. But yes, certainly interesting to see this kind of thing play out. But yeah, the event went ahead, obviously. There were other artists. Aiden Samad is one of them. They were saying they weren't told there was going to be an AI artist playing before them and were annoyed about the situation, as were some punters that were there. But good intent for their part. They've come out with a statement that's very solid. I think it appears to have been an oversight. They didn't realise the AI components of the artists that they were booking. And they are, very serious about wanting to support artists. And I think if you're to look at the actions of Good Intent over the years and judge them by their actions, they are absolutely huge supporters of emerging human artists and have been for a long time. They're organisation full of some really good people. And I think we have to keep that in mind when we're looking at this as as an oversight. They've come out with a statement taking full responsibility, just saying they didn't look deeply enough at the particular artist's socials, and their representatives, quote, their representatives' communication used wording consistent with genuine artists. Their representative described them to us as a producer who used live vocals in their sets. This person was booked through an agency who presented themselves as professional. I hadn't seen them live, but now looking at their socials, their content is clearly and blatantly AI. So, yeah, it appears to be an oversight on the part of good intent, and I think we should absolutely take what they're saying as true because of, as I mentioned before, their actions over the years are, polar opposite to, empowering AI artists.
Yeah, I think it's a really good statement. It was Rob who made that statement, said he runs Good Intent. He also books Mixbag. And as you said, he took full responsibility for it. In the statement, he continued to say that Good Intent and bootleggers have never knowingly and will never book people who use AI to generate music. He said, for those who don't know us, Good Intent is passionate about supporting and doing the right thing by real artists. We run a yearly initiative called Greater Good, which is what you mentioned before, Eamon. And Bootleggers, likewise, has long been a place where new and emerging artists play their first shows, develop their skills, and connect with their audience. They go on to say, we'll ensure we review our vetting process moving forward. We never want to be placed in a position where we encourage the use of AI and financially support them from artists on which AI is trained. To put our money where our mouth is, Bootleggers and Good Intent will make a donation to Support Act. Additionally, we'd love to have you back so we can make it right. Apologies and thanks for bringing it to our attention. We'll make sure we do better. We don't support AI. We support genuine artists.
Yeah, there's no trying to dodge there. You know what I mean? There's no trying to dodge. There's no trying to explain your way out of it. It's, an oversight that they've acknowledged, apologised for, and they're looking to make right. So I'm, not at all holding any ill will to Good Intent for that. These things are going to happen, like increasingly, I suppose, and it's a good reminder for booking agents, organisers, promoters to be, if that's not your flavour, you need to be looking at that. And I also think we need disclaimers. If you are going to choose artists like that, which is your prerogative, we need disclaimers so that punters, ticket purchasers, fellow artists are aware of who they're going to be sharing the stage or who they're going to be seeing on stage. Because, as I said, had that been Cam and I going to a gig on the Central Coast without the expectation of that and then that happening, I feel like you'd feel a little bit dirty, Yeah,
you would.
Particularly, in the context of emerging artists, other human beings who are meant to be playing on that stage.
Yeah, you definitely would feel a bit dirty, and I can understand why people who were there that night feel wronged by it. And I suppose you're talking about having it very transparent whether you are booking AI acts, and obviously this was an oversight, as you said. There was no intent, no pun intended, there was no good intent behind actually booking the AI artists, and they've said that they won't do that. But there will be people who see this as an opportunity and go, well, we can probably, pay you, I don't know whether they change their rate, whether it's AI or not. It might be a little bit cheaper because it's technically a band, but only one person. I don't know how that side of it works, but from a booking perspective, I don't see any real incentive to advertise that it's AI. Like, sure, people might be pissed off, but you're also, the general public seem very against AI in general life, but in music, it feels like that is heavily weighted even further in a lot of creative industries. People see AI as not a genuine creation tool. And as a result of that, if you say we've got an AI artist on our bill, people will go, well, I'm not going to buy a ticket to that. So I don't see any incentive for people to be transparent around it. And maybe if we can tie a thread to some of our next part of where we're leading this discussion is maybe we need the government to introduce some legislation to protect not just, companies from ripping data and actual music from musicians without any proper pay, but maybe we need government to also introduce some live protections against AI as well.
Yeah, even some mandates just around disclosure, I think is fair. Like if we're to go back to Rob's statement from Good Intent, Rob Carroll, he said their representative described them as, quote, a producer who used, quote, live vocals in their sets. So obviously when they're going through the process of booking and dealing with the reps of this artist, whoever they may be, they're clearly not making it very clear that there's a significant,
Yeah.
2/3 AI component or half AI component to that band. And if you're proud of the nuts and bolts that have gone into making your work, then you're going to proudly display them and let people know. If you're trying to hide them, I think that's very, very telling in the first place.
Yeah, even the whole, live vocals, granted, that seemed like they were live singing, but the producer element. Are you a producer if you're going to Suno and saying, give me a drum beat, or even if you're still going back and using different prompts to try and craft it perhaps more to how you envisioned? How much of a producer are you if that's what you're doing? And this is always the argument, because Instagram and social media companies were wanting to have, generated by AI sort of attachment to, posts that go up on their platforms. But then where do you draw the line? You might have captions which are auto-generated by AI, but the actual content is 100% human-made. You might have a graphic attached to it, which is AI generated, but everything else is genuine. You might have a voiceover, which is AI, or it could be 100% AI generated, but there's a lot of gray in the middle between no AI use and all AI. And where are we drawing that line to say you need to label this as AI content?
Yeah, it's tricky, and we need to work that out, I think, absolutely. I think on your note about the producer thing, I think it's, maybe I'm sorry if I'm insulting anyone here, I'm not meaning to really, but is the person making burgers at Macca's a chef? You know what I mean? That's kind of how I see it.
I think it's even
a Michelin star restaurant person, that person in the Michelin star restaurant. Yeah, you're both making food. One person is making food with a lot more detailed creativity and craft, and the other person is making food with a lot more, help. I don't mean to denigrate anyone who works. I worked at KFC. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to denigrate you at all. I'm just drawing the comparison between the actual process of producing and making the meal.
Maybe we go more the line of, are you an actual pilot, or do you just have Microsoft Flight Simulator? Or are you a farmer, or you just play Farmville on the Facebook app?
Well, don't make me adjust my resume, Cam. Bloody hell, I was looking pretty good.
I don't know. Maybe that's a better comparison. I don't know. Maybe it's not. But I feel like at least if you're working at McDonald's, you are still, I don't know. I've never worked in a McDonald's kitchen. It all seems to be fairly automatic as well. Now, I'm going to get hate. Let's move on before we get properly hate bombed.
Sorry. Well, I have a quick, actually not really a pivot at all, but I just want to vomit out a thought I've been having over the last couple of weeks. It's really related to AI, kind of.
Yeah.
I have surfed my whole life, and the great Andy Irons, who died over a decade ago now, legendary surfer from America, his name was commonly referred to as AI, and I just wonder how he feels about that. When he's remembered, it was AI, and now his great name, or the initials of his great name, is being used in incredibly controversial technology. And I just want to shout outs to Andy Irons.
Hi, it's us. Sorry to interrupt us, but we're here with an important message from our sponsor, Sonora Studios.
Yes, go to Sonora Studios. And we will expand upon that message. Jack was really brief in what he sent us.
It was just all caps, go to Sonora.
Well, take that advice if you want. But if you are a musician or a music producer and you're looking for a space to record your work or record the work of others or work out of, we would like to highly recommend Sonora Studios in Tuggerah for you to do that. It's a fantastic space curated by Jack Negro. Very welcoming, unreal place to record out of, at least for podcasts, but we know based on all the musicians we spoke to that it's fantastic for music as well. It's got everything, a very well-designed, well-thought-out place with some of literally the best producers in the country and some of the best bands in the country frequenting it. So do check out Sonora Studios if that is what you're looking for.
On a very different note, and this is tangential now, I had you might have even had him as well. He was a teacher at our high school named Mr. Thickstone, I think it was. And He was like, and he said, call me Mr. T. And I was like, no, I'm not calling you Mr. T. You are a tall, white, lanky man. I'm not referring to you as Mr. T.
I remember Mr. Thickstone.
Anyway, that is tangential.
That is absolutely. But yeah, Cam, you had crafted a beautiful runway for us to kind of step into our next story, which I just probably
we've ruined
destroyed.
That's fine. That's what we do.
But the next story we are going into, which is we just got AI stories coming out of our ears today. A new investigation by The Atlantic, which has managed to quantify the amount of artists that have had, and the particular artists, the amount of them that have had their artists scraped and stolen, specifically stolen by AI.
Yeah. It's pretty extraordinary. And when I look at I'll go into the story before I go into this a bit more. So the AI watchdog tool, which is by The Atlantic, which are a US publication, that their AI watchdog tool allows anyone to look up an artist and see exactly what their songs have been fed into AI training systems without consent, without a license, and without payment. And according to APRA AMCOS, some of the biggest names across Australia and New Zealand are implicated, which includes Midnight Oil, Cold Chisel, Sia, INXS, Kylie Minogue, Nick Cave, Tame Impala, and many more. And my thought around this is, if they're doing this to artists of that size, what hope do independent or emerging artists have to protect themselves from these big AI companies from scraping their music? Like, if they're doing it to some of the biggest and some of those who would be on the biggest labels with the biggest protections around their copyright, what hope do small artists have?
Yeah, it's actually cooked, because when we spoke about the carve-outs, the proposed carve-outs to the Copyright Act for AI companies training themselves off Aussie works at the end of last year when that blew up, we're going to get onto that, the update in that story in a moment. But when we spoke about that, the lead-in story to that was, well, we actually already know they've already been doing it. But what we're trying to do is not let their doing it be legislated. We're actually going to try and legislate the opposite. So this has been known about for a while, but to have it quantified, have the artist named, whatever this tool is great. I don't know how they work that out, like, in terms of developing a tool that can
It's
work this
probably
out. I'm
AI.
glad someone has. Yeah, it probably is. Well, there can be good and bad uses of it.
That's like going to AI and being like, is this AI? And then pasting an excerpt, and it's like, yes, this is AI. I'm not saying it is that, but I wouldn't be surprised as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. So, we knew it was happening, but it is happening, and it's just like, it does really hit you in the hope, because it's like, how are we policing this? Who's policing this? Obviously there's a tool which can tell you whether it's being used, and like, what are you going to go through legal action? How are you to determine the context, who's used it? But in whatever the headquarters of these places are in Silicon Valley, there's probably someone going, just do it. The music's available. All you need is a Spotify subscription to hear it. You can rip music really easily. So it's really disappointing, but yeah, crazy to see what's gone on in such clarity with this tool, and really, really disappointing. And it comes amidst a backdrop, which we'll get to, unless you had more on this particular story, Cam.
Well, the only thing I was going to mention is, we mentioned Suno before, and how much of Midnight Oil, Cold Chisel, Tame Impala, how much of their music has been ripped and put onto Suno for artists like who performed live at Bootleggers. How much of that was used there, or similar examples of that, which is again part of the problem there.
Yeah, and you can see the very unfortunate circularity of this system. You know what I mean? Like, these programs are built, they're ripping off Australian artists, they're used to create artists that go on to take spots of artists on Australian stages, and the cycle continues, and it's like, you can see this is not a good thing that's happening. It's not a good thing. And we're not I know we bang on a lot. We're not anti-AI, and I think that, most people fundamentally aren't, as a general rule. It's just how this stuff is being used, and it's not being used at all well in a lot of spaces, particularly the creative spaces.
Yeah, I certainly see the benefit of AI. I can see how it can, particularly in the fields of medicine as well, the way that it's advanced. Some findings in that world. In the legal field, I know there have been judges in the States who have been caught out using AI, and they've been just making up cases that don't exist, which is, again, the bad side and part of it anyway. But I created a spreadsheet through AI, to track a lot of my contract work stuff, to just make my life easier. We're not against it as a general branch, I suppose. Like, we're not we can see the benefits to it, but the way it's being used, where, as you said, real artists are having their actual protected material just stolen. We're having opportunities for real musicians to be on stage or to collaborate with people gone. And I can't remember the exact figure, but it was something, $500 billion is what's estimated to be lost from the Australian arts sector over the next 4 years as a result of AI, which is just insane.
Yeah, and it's not like they're flush with cash to begin with. So, taking 500 billion from our artists is not at all helpful. But yeah, this is all happening amidst a backdrop of this kind of ongoing seesaw within the federal government, so it seems, around AI protections. And this is what we're going to get onto as our next story. This one's got a couple of components to it. But basically, I mentioned before the issue that blew up towards the end of last year, which we reported on quite a bit. So go back through our archives and find that particular podcast if you want a bit more context. We've done a couple of updates into this year about it. Effectively, it became clear that the Productivity Commission did a review, and they were basically suggesting, well, no, just let the AI companies have our artists. We'll put a little clause in the Copyright Act so they're not doing anything wrong if they take the works. And artists were like, well, hang on a minute. How about you have a chat to us, please? That all blew up. And what it resulted in was Anthony Albanese and the government coming out and, swearing that they would not create this carve out for AI. What we've gone on to see was, that's held. They've maintained that position outwardly, but then we've seen reports. We reported on one earlier this year of kind of continued attempts either being, about to happen or suggested to happen from AI companies and from various like business councils and things like that are all basically trying to reverse this rule or make this happen, but make it not look like it's happening. Oh yeah, no, there's no carve outs. We've just got this other thing over here that lets us do the same thing effectively. And what we concluded was, well, this isn't going to go anywhere. This is going to be an ongoing battle against the interests of business and AI companies, multinationals who want this work for free and want favorable conditions from our government. You might have seen during the week that a bunch of Australian artists went to Canberra to demand the government hold firm on this very framework that we've been discussing. And when I saw that, I was like, well, why do we need to? The government's been very clear, But what's birthed this latest push from our creatives was David Pocock revealing in federal parliament that a whistleblower, a credible source, a whistleblower had reached out to his office and alleged that at the highest level of government, there is confidential consideration of two competing proposals to change copyright policy for AI training. Now, David Pocock, and this reporting comes via the ABC, David Pocock said one proposal being seriously considered would create a copyright carve-out for AI companies tied to billions of dollars of data center investment and hundreds of millions of dollars annually for creative funds. So my read of that is there's a carve-out for AI companies because we're investing so much in your country to build our data centers, which is another kind of issue we might get to. And as a, compensation, they'll create an annual creative fund that has millions of dollars annually going into it. The other submission allegedly would instead expand licensing agreements that would clear the way for AI companies to legally use Australian material to train their proprietary technology, which just seems like a change to the Copyright Act.
Which is what they said they wouldn't do, right? That's what that second proposal was effectively what they tried to do the first time before we all said, well, hang on, that doesn't sound right. And then this carve out to we're going to host all of our data centers here, therefore let us do this for free and we'll contribute millions of dollars, which, as we said, 500 billion is the estimated loss from AI over the next 4 years. So that is absolute peanuts in change compared to what the industry should be receiving from royalties and the like that AI companies are taking. But the whole data, like this is part of, when we covered it last time, was Anthropic, which is one of the major AI companies. They have Claude, which is their ChatGPT equivalent, but like Anthropic, OpenAI, all of these big AI companies are wanting to have data centers built in this country. We saw the state government have a deal with OpenAI to have data centers built in New South Wales, and there's been a renewed push for them. And I don't know if it's related, but certainly not long after Anthropic visited this country and spoke with federal politicians, it does feel like there's been a bit more attention and spotlight on how can we get data centers built in Australia. And on one hand, you don't want to fall behind because, as Eamon said, this is happening, right? So if you can get the infrastructure built here, it could potentially be financially beneficial. But we need to make sure that we're not just selling land and getting nothing in return, effectively.
Yeah, and like this is such a tangled web. But basically, at the end of last year, following all of this backlash, and we've spoken at length about this, so I'm going to try not to repeat ourselves. We spoke in a music news in April about this in a lot more detail with timelines and things. And I'd really encourage you. We put a fair bit of detail into that particular episode. So if you want to go back and listen, check it out. But basically, there's been a timeline going on, for some years, and basically it's been the federal government doing nowhere near enough preparation for this wave of AI that was going to hit us inevitably, that everybody could see. AI technology has been around in various forms for a couple of decades. We've only been, acutely aware of it for the last 5+ years. But your governments knew this was coming. Anyone, in that space, in that world, knew this was coming. The government of both sides of politics sat on their hands for far too long. And then in the last couple of years have gone, oh shit, we better, develop a framework. We had one in place, we had one that was, looking to be adopted, which was an AI advisory board, in that it was going to involve like a licensing or mandatory guardrails, they were called, for businesses, where they had to adhere to certain operating principles when using AI. That all was happening. There was like shortlisted nominees for the AI advisory board, blah, blah, and then it got scrapped. And instead, we ended up at the end of last year with a national AI plan. The national AI plan revolves around 3 principles. 1 is capture opportunities. 2 is spread the benefits. 3 is keep Australians safe. It had detail, but a lot of people were really disappointed with this AI plan because it removed any hard guardrails, and it also removed a standalone AI Act, which is like desperately needed in this country. It was considered more of a soft touch approach by a lot of people, and they wanted to shoehorn the governance of AI into existing laws and legislation rather than creating, as I mentioned, a standalone AI Act to kind of govern it, which I think we really need. But the number one of those 3 principles is capture opportunities. Now, since that AI plan has been released this year, you've just seen so much chat about AI data centers coming into Australia, and that's that capture opportunities principle. And as you said, Cam, we shouldn't be turning them away necessarily, but it really doesn't seem like we're considering the implications anywhere near well enough of the data centers. And we're getting semi-off topic for music here, but David Pocock, who has kind of released this whistleblower suggestion about the copyright considerations, he's made the really good point. He's been very vocal about a gas tax in Australia, which I think most Australians agree with fundamentally. And he's made the point that, well, are we making this exact same mistake with AI data centers? So we're inviting these companies in. They're building data centers at an alarming rate. You can kind of look up how many are being built and how many are proposed. They have an extreme resources drain when that comes to the use of energy and water specifically. In a drought-prone country, we can all see where that would go bad. But obviously what that means is these companies are coming, they're creating investment, they're creating jobs in the construction and, some ongoing jobs with the operation of the facilities. But there's a lot of resource use of Australian resources that happens there, whether that be water or energy or whatever else. Should we have a levy, a tax, similar to a gas tax for the use of Australia's resources, or is it just going to be another case of, look, we'll invest in your country, beautiful, blah, 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 some jobs are created, and then we're generating billions of profits from these data centers, and then we just piss off with the profits back overseas, and Australia actually doesn't see too much of them. Many of these data centers as well, I might add, are being used to store the data that we don't really want AI to have of us. It's not so much, ChatGPT needs this. It's like, okay, we've got facial recognition at Bunnings now, and we need to store the data of people in there somewhere and things like that. So all of it is very, very concerning, I think. But the point that we're landing on is that yes, the government outwardly is saying about copyright, we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. We saw artists go to Canberra during the week, and there's photos with Tony Burke, the arts minister. There seems to be, positive response. But this is not at all safe, I don't think. And is going to be an ongoing battle. And if we have a change of government to someone who prefers investment over creation, then I think you could just as easily see everything thrown out the window.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point on water, electricity as well is a big concern at least in New South Wales at the moment. A lot of our coal-fired power stations are closing down in the next 5 or so years. There's a lot of emphasis on green and clean energy through solar and new transmission lines and wind projects, snowy hydro. It's all being debated, and there's a lot of opposition to it as well. It's a lot of support for it as well. But our energy storage isn't secure at the moment either. We're adding in a bunch of data centers, which are very energy heavy and also water heavy, as you said, Eamon. There's a lot more at stake, even separating it from music and the arts and copyright and ownership and finances on that aspect. There's also just the broader, climate that we are in at the moment to do with water and energy, etc. But to bring it back to the music, so Tim Ayres, who's the Minister for Industry and Science, he accused David Pocock of reckless speculation for airing the claim, but Mr. Pocock said that that Tim Ayres didn't actually deny or reject the claims. And a spokesperson for Ayres and also for Assistant Minister Andrew Charlton, they both called the claims as inaccurate. They both said the government has ruled out a text and data mining exception. Our position has not changed. But as we touched on, that sort of second submission seems somewhat aligned with that exception. And then a spokesperson for Attorney General Michelle Rowland also denied a plan to weaken copyright protection for AI training, saying we're committed to ensuring that Australia has a fit-for-purpose copyright framework that protects and supports Australia's creative and media industries while unlocking AI innovation, which goes back to that sort of first pillar of the framework, Eamon, about opportunities. But as you said, there were a bunch of creatives in Canberra last week. Obviously, Holly Rankin or Jack River has been very vocal on it. There was also KLP, William Barton, Paul Dempsey, just an absolute range of creations, authors. We also had John Collins from Powderfinger. There were film composers down there too. So it's not just music that's being affected, it's just art and creatives in general who are opposing a lot of what AI are trying to really steal from these artists.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just shows that this will be an ongoing battle. Since October, we've had now last year when all this blew up, and then we had the framework come through in December. There's been 2 scares, you would call them, to this exact exemption. So the first of which we reported on a couple of months ago, and there's another one now. And we know the way lobbying works in the same way that the musos are going, the artists, as you said, this involves authors, this involves film, every branch of art, visual arts too. But in the same way that the artists are going down and doing some lobbying. But in the halls of Parliament House, every single day, there is the number of lobbyists that are walking around that we don't really know exactly who they are and what they're doing is huge. It's like hundreds of them that are literally walking around our Parliament House every day advocating for various interests. And that lobbying is an important part of democracy, not necessarily saying we shouldn't have lobbyists, but sure as shit, there's lobbyists on behalf of AI getting around, getting in the ears of Parliament, getting in the ears of politicians, particularly as this investment rolls into Australia, who want changes that are, fortuitous for their industry. And they're not going to shut up, so we need to be continuing this fight. But, it's already bloody exhausting. We're 12 months, not even 12 months, 9 months. And we've had, this many kind of scares to what should be a pretty robust bit of policy. It's only going to continue, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the lobbying isn't equal either, I would argue. I would argue that a bunch of creatives going to Parliament to have these discussions, they're obviously arguing this is what's right, this is what's fair, this is what's decent. And the AI lobbyists are saying, look at all this investment and money that we can bring to your country, which, at the time, a lot of country were in stupid amounts of debt, as is most other countries in the world, which I still don't really understand how that can be a thing. But I'm not a financial person. I don't really need to understand that. I don't think it just is. But the point I'm making is, if you have AI companies promising investments in infrastructure, and you have musicians saying this is what's right, this is what's fair, as a government, they need to weigh up those arguments. And it does seem like at least the artists and creatives are being listened to. But whether, they have more sway than a billion or $1 trillion company, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be a particularly bad look for Tony Burke to line up and get photos with Australian artists advocating for a cause, and then 2 months later go and reverse the legislation. So you hopefully, you have a bit of faith. Hopefully it's not going to change. But it feels like, and this is where a standalone act would be helpful, or, something that was kind of embedded in a way that can't be changed, where we need to work out a core value principle of art and just have an unchangeable part of government, that, or legislation, constitution, however it works, excuse my ignorance, but we need to have something that can't be changed, that is not going to be at the whim of a change of government or leadership in the future, because it just feels like it's on shaky ground. It feels like the Iran-American ceasefire. Every time it's announced, you go, well, okay, well, I'll give it not very long before it's breached. And it feels very similar with this, great, we've got this position. However, this is not permanent.
I have about as much faith in all of that than a house built of straw and some anyone understand, I'm sure you understand
this
reference.
Little biggie.
Yes, indeed. Yes. But we've been talking about how complicated all of this is, right? There's so much grey in the middle, and there's a lot to discuss. But Lucy Hayward from the Australian Society of Authors said that despite what tech might tell you, copyright is simple. If you want to use someone's work, you need to ask for permission, and copyright is also how authors earn a living. And then, instead of coming to creators and rights holders to do deals, big tech is throwing money at lobbying in Canberra for solutions that would enable them to use creators' work in exchange for chump change. For all intents and purposes, that's wage theft for the creative industries. Now, I immediately drew parallels to Spotify spending money in court so they didn't have to pay artists more money. It's like, if you're spending the money anyway, just spend it properly. That's my take. But anyway, that was a parallel I drew with that statement. But
I was about to make the same comment as you were reading that quote to me there. It's exactly the same. Money protecting your own interests, not money supporting artists, basically. Yeah. Annabelle Hurd from ARIA also said, we're standing in Parliament House today, united across the creative and media industries, to ask the government to hold the line it drew in October and let the licensing market function as it should. She went on to say there is very sophisticated, very official licensing system that ensures that the creator of that work and the rights holders get paid. We are here to do deals with AI companies. Many deals are happening globally, and those deals will continue to be announced. And that is the mechanism by which Australian creators and writers and authors and others will get paid. We don't need changes to our laws. These companies are worth so much money. Just pay artists, pay artists in the correct way. That is our conclusion. So yeah, we'd actually love to hear what you think. I'm pretty sure you can comment on our podcast now. If you're watching this on YouTube, which we do upload the full videos of our podcast to YouTube. If you weren't aware, jump on that, subscribe to Homebrewed Media on YouTube. But if you're watching this, even if you're listening via a podcasting platform, I'm pretty sure you can comment on it now, or hit us up on our socials when we inevitably post clips about this discussion. We would love to hear what you think, particularly if you're an artist, if you're a consumer, if you've been around the traps longer than us. We'd love to hear a kind of range of perspectives on this. And again, if there's some context that you feel like you don't have, scroll down to our various music newses anywhere, from the end of last year to now. We've done a few episodes kind of talking about this issue and expanding on the updates. And tracking that timeline a little bit closer as well. So you can go back through our archives and catch up on that if you are missing any details.
Yeah, indeed. So anything, if you have any comments on the good intent and the AI live performance side, if you have anything to do with the copyright protections, do let us know. Or you can sign up to our Patreon and you get it sometimes early, but you get the podcast ad-free, and you can comment underneath that audio as well and have a discussion there with our little community over on Patreon. But we're going to leave that episode here as it is, as I then go to have my seventh cry of the weekend over the Socceroos being eliminated from the World Cup. But thank you very much for your attention. I like how we're referencing the Socceroos in the World Cup. That's obviously, as I said, the day after we got eliminated, but by the time you're listening to this episode, the World Cup's probably, the Socceroos, it's done. It's old news. So much drama would have happened in between. Maybe England have been knocked out by Mexico. That's not going to be an easy game for them down in Monterrey. But anyway, I'm done. We'll see you next week.
Enjoy the World Cup if you are watching it. It is great.
Yeah, it's great.
It brings the whole world together. We kind of need that at the moment. Just we're sad. We're going to need a couple of weeks. On the plus side, the Mariners actually, let's not go there. I'll just say they've been purchased, but they didn't buy the women's team. That's a whole other issue. But
yes,
at least locally for us, our local football team has a brighter future than it had. But anyway, thank you very much for your attention. You just got to accept that we're going to talk about football at this podcast. Thank you very much. Follow us socials, etc. We'll see you next week with an interview with an artist.
See ya.